So this is the story of Unit 731, an arm of the Japanese Imperial Army that, along with some other associated units, they developed, tested, and employed chemical and biological warfare weapons. And there's 2 books that I reviewed and will be referring to during this podcast. One is Unit 731 by Pete Williams and David Wallace, and the other is Unit 731 Testimony by Hal Gold. And the history and the acts that are accounted for in these books really show what man is capable of, especially under malevolent leadership. And in this case, the leader that is primarily culpable for the crimes of Unit 731 is the individual referred to in that opening statement, a guy named by the name of Ishii, Shiro Ishii, who was born June 25th, 1892, the 4th son in a wealthy land-owning family. He was a smart, apparently very smart individual. He was a big, tall, kind of strapping guy, and by most accounts, he was a pretty arrogant individual as well. And he went to school to become a doctor and joined the army, and there he studied bacteriology and serology, which is the study of blood and pathogens in the blood. And he was also a fiercely patriotic and nationalistic individual. And what that meant in Japan at this time was a feeling of total superiority, both a cultural superiority and a racial superiority. Cultural and racial superiority over the rest of Asia and really over the rest of the world. And he moved up through the ranks fairly quickly, and he had done some traveling and of course saw what things that happened in World War I, and he saw chemical and biological warfare as a way to win wars. And obviously Japan is a island nation with limited resources, and so you need some advantage. And he thought the advantage that Japan could get was chemical and biological warfare. And in order to really maximize that advantage, he believed that these weapons needed to be tested on people. He believed that human experimentation was the pathway to move ahead of the rest of the world technologically in these departments. And oddly enough, he gained a decent amount of clout and prestige by inventing a water filtration system that could provide clean water to soldiers on the front line, which was a really big deal. And the book Testimony, the Unit 731 Testimony, goes into pretty good detail about the number of people that were killed in wars back then and how many of them would die of diseases and malnutrition from being sick from the water, having diseases and whatnot. And so he developed this filtration system that worked really well. And he ended up actually taking advantage of that a little too much, and he used that technology which he had come up with to get some kickback payments from a commercial company that manufactured the filters, and that kind of got him in some trouble, but that trouble was overcome because he had some political connections that he had gained. And he got back on path and continued to gain rank and gain stature. And with that rank and that stature that he gained, he convinced his leadership to allow him to begin a highly secret program where he would make and test the biological and chemical weapons. And again, at this time, chemical and biological weapons were very politically sensitive. So this is in the mid 1930s. The end of World War I had only occurred just prior to this, really, 20 years. And people remembered those wars, that war, and they remembered the horrors of those weapons. And that's why international law had forbidden these weapons. But Ishii didn't care. Ishii was there to win at any cost. And because of the view of the chemical and biological weapons at this time and the political sensitivity around them, he couldn't do what he wanted to do inside of Japan. Because these weapons are dangerous, first of all, but again, the political sensitivities around them. That was okay because he had other plans. And he opened his first laboratory in Manchuria, an area of China that was at this time under the brutal control of Imperial Japan. And the first laboratory that he put together was outside of a city called Harbin. And interestingly, the unit maintained a level of cover, meaning their purpose wasn't made known to the world. The people, they advertised the unit that they put in Manchuria that it was all about water purification. And they actually did water purification there, so it was a good cover story. But what was really being focused on underneath that cover was the creation of biological and chemical weapons that they could use for war. And as Ishii made progression, the project expanded.